So is it okay? Okay, so there's a lot to cover, so I'd like to get started roughly on time. So I wanted to start out by thanking Jonathan very much. I know you got this random email from someone asking, I need help with assisting and advising families on financial aid, and I'm really grateful that he was able to give this presentation. So to introduce Jonathan, Jonathan Hughes is the Associate Director of College Planning and Content Creation at the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, also known as MEFA, which specializes in student loans and guidance on ways to pay for university. Jonathan joined MEFA in 2001 as a loan counselor, and in his current role, he provides guidance on planning, saving, and paying for college to students and their family. So I'll turn it over to Jonathan, and thank you so much for doing this presentation.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to do that. And thank you, everybody who is joining us now. And again, thanks to Kristen for arranging it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Um, and I apologize I'm going to do this in a really kind of clunky way. So, haven't figured out how to do this gracefully yet. So just bear with me for a moment. Okay. So thank you. Oh, excuse me. And just before we get started, I see somebody has already activated the live transcripts. I just want to let you know that that is an option, but some of you figured that out. If you wanted to have a live transcript, you can do that. If you have a question, the chat has been disabled, but please put your question into the Q&A. It's easier for me to see that way anyway, so I can answer the questions as we go. And if I know that the answer is going to be coming up shortly, I may not answer it right away. I may just wait for that to happen. And also, if you have questions that I don't know the answer to, which is probably more likely than it typically is in this situation because of the international aspect. I am not an expert in international admissions, and every school really has their own process when it comes to international students. But I can get back to you with the answer later on. And also, if you wanted to talk after the presentation, please stick around and we can chat. Or Kristen, if you want, you can forward my email to anybody on this presentation, anybody that you come across that has a question about attending higher education in the United States, and we can go and talk about that. So, about MEFA. MEFA is the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. We were created back in 1982 to help families plan, save, and pay for college. We have a public service mission to do that. We do that in a variety of ways. We do offer loans to pay for college, but we also offer savings plans and do a lot of educational outreach like this. So if you go to MEFA.org, you can check out our tools, our video content, blog content, podcasts, all this sort of information that's available for you to be able to access for free with any questions that you may have. And you can contact us and make an appointment or oh, sorry. Is there a way? Let's see. There we go. Sorry, you're out there. I didn't realize you could see that. Thanks, Kristen. So yeah. Use us as a resource for any questions that you may have in planning, saving, or paying for college in the United States. We're a free resource for you to take advantage of. So I hope you'll do that. What we'll talk about today, and just so that you know, this is largely the presentation that we would give to graduating seniors in high school in the United States who are looking to attend college next year. So the most of this is going to be related to financial aid basics and financial aid opportunities that are available to U.S. citizens or permanent residents, but also if you're not, we'll have information about what you can do to get financial aid as well. So what we're going to be talking about today is the types and sources of financial aid. So when we say financial aid, what is it that we're talking about? The application process itself. So what forms do you need to file? And that's going to be different based on your citizenship status for financial aid. How financial aid decisions are made. So once a college or the government or whatever the case may be is actually looking at the information that you put into your financial aid applications, and they're looking at that information, how do they decide how much you're eligible to receive and then how much you get? Once that happens and you have a financial aid offer from a college and you have a balance due, how do people actually pay for college? And so this takes on an added dimension with an international audience. But just to let you know that I always say that the most common question that I get from parents, and I've talked to many, many of them over my 20 plus years at MEFA, is how do people pay for college? Really, it's a mystery to just about everybody until they get to that point. And they want to know how do people do this? So you probably have the idea, being not in the United States, that college in the United States is very expensive or can be very expensive. And you know that is and can be true. So people want to know, how do people do this? So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about free resources. So again, some of these resources will be more applicable to some of you than others, but I just want to sort of go over them, and what is relevant to you hopefully will be relevant to you. So types and sources of financial aid. So what is financial aid? Very simply put, it's money set aside to help students pay for college. But just so you know that there are three main types of financial aid. So the first are grants and scholarships. This is what's called gift aid. This is the best kind of financial aid that there is because it's just gifted. It doesn't have to be repaid. It's just you have a balance due, the gift aid hits, and that is subtracted from your balance. So what we're talking about is grants and scholarships, and we'll talk about the difference between those two things in just a minute. The second option is federal work study. Now, this is available to U.S. citizens. And can anybody say, actually, before I go on, it might be helpful to know, or as I go on, it might be helpful to know, if anybody is a U.S. citizen or a U.S. permanent resident, if you can let me know in the Q&A so I know, because a lot of this stuff is contingent upon being a U.S. citizen. So I won't spend 20 minutes talking about these things if it's not going to be applicable to folks, but I will go over it basically. Federal work study is basically money set aside to work a job to earn by working a job on campus. And so if you get a financial aid offer from a college, it might say, for example, $1,500 or $2,000 or $500, whatever it might be, in federal work study. So if you want that, what that means is you have to find a work study job, get the job, work the hours, you'd get paid in a paycheck just like any other job. And if you don't do those things, if you get a federal work study offer, but you never get the job, you don't get that money. So if you see it and you want it, make sure you talk to your financial aid office. And this is a good idea for anybody, citizen, non-citizen, whatever it might be, work study, no work study, whatever. If you have questions, and we'll hammer this again and again and again, reach out to the financial aid office at the college with any questions. So back to my work study. If you have work study in your offer and you want to take advantage of it, make sure you know how the college communicates with their work study students. So some colleges blast out a listing of all of their work study jobs to their work study students, and they can go and find the jobs and earn the money. Some don't. They leave that up to the student. It all depends. And if you don't see a work study job, doesn't mean that you can't get a job on campus. There are other jobs that you can get on or around campus that aren't work study jobs. And then finally, the last kind of financial aid is federal student loans. And so these are student loans that are available to students, U.S. citizens or permanent residents. And, I'm not sure what you know of paying for college or getting loans to pay for college essentially in America, but this comes as a surprise to a lot of parents and students since there is so much talk about student loans in the US. A lot of people just assume that students can just borrow whatever they need to borrow from the government as long as they uh, are as long as they promise to pay it back afterwards. And that's really not the case. So when I say that federal student loans are financial aid, I mean only that one program among loans, federal direct student loan programs. Other types of loans, including the MEFA loan, it's not financial aid. The reason that federal student loans are financial aid is number one, there's no credit check to be approved for it. So you file your financial aid form, your FAFSA, and you're eligible essentially to get these loans. Um, and they have benefits associated with them that aren't really available with other loans. And so we'll talk about them briefly here, but I don't want to spend too long on it because I haven't gotten anybody saying that they are federal U.S. citizens, but I will go over it a bit in case somebody is registered and is watching this later on. But federal direct student loans, again, these are really mostly the only types of loans that most undergraduate students can borrow on their own without a co-applicant because there's no credit check to be approved for them. They come in subsidized and unsubsidized varieties, meaning if you have a subsidized loan, there's no interest accruing on that loan while you're in school. When you're in school, those loans are in deferment. You're not expected to repay those. They go into repayment 6 months after you graduate. And on the subsidized portion, as I said, there's no interest that is being added to that. But if you have an unsubsidized loan, then there is interest being added to it. This is the interest rate for the upcoming year. It's a fixed interest rate, but every year will be a different rate. And as you can see here, these are the loan limits that students are able to borrow in their own name on the right. So 5,500 freshman year, sophomore year, 6,500, junior year and senior year, both 7,500. So that is what you're able to borrow. That is part of the financial aid. And so the big benefits of these loans, other than the fact that the student can be approved for them without a credit check, if you take all of these loans that you're eligible to take for the 4 years, then you're going to leave after 4 years with about $27,000 in student loan debt in your own name only as the student. Again, these go into repayment 6 months after the student graduates. And the repayment term is defaulted to 10 years. So you get 10 years to repay these. At this interest rate, this $27,000 over 10 years, the monthly payment would be just above, again, a very crude estimate, about just above $300 a month. So if that's manageable for you, then fine. But if it's not, there's a lot of different options that you can get on to lower this monthly payment. So you can stretch the repayment term out to 20, 25 years, lower that monthly payment. You can lower it to as low as 5% of your discretionary income every month. There's just a lot of flexibility. If you go to graduate school, you can put those back into an in-school deferment. And if you're having an economic hardship, there's other deferment, forbearance, and a public service loan forgiveness option as well. So just a lot of flexibility in how these loans are repaid versus other types of loans, private loans, alternative loans that don't have that same flexibility. There's not like a forgiveness option on other types of loans. There's no interest subsidies on other types of loans. So one of the only things that we really recommend at MEFA is that everybody should do is if you are borrowing anything at all, you start by taking these loans first, if that's an option for you, before moving on to other loans. If you have to do that, which, often people do because you can see there is a loan limit associated with how much you can borrow here that is often not enough to pay the full balance for the year. In terms of where financial aid can come from, I've already mentioned the federal government quite a bit. So federal grants, work studies, a federal program, these federal loans that we just talked about, and tax breaks that you get for paying for tuition. Of course, for Massachusetts, we're the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, but states also give out financial aid. For international students, almost all of their financial aid is going to come from the college or university itself. So the college and university gives out a lot of financial aid, and most of it gift aid. So a lot of grants and scholarships coming from colleges, and we'll talk about that in just a second. the difference between grants and scholarships. Some colleges also may have their own loan programs. It's less common, but it does happen. And then, of course, there are outside scholarships, and this is another avenue for international students. So there are private scholarships that you can search and apply for, and it really depends on each particular scholarship, what their requirements and criteria are to be approved for that, but you can search for scholarships. And MEFA also posts a lot of scholarship opportunities on our social channels as well. So I'll show the information for that near the end. And you can follow that if you'd like. And so just to give you an idea, it's very well understood, as I said, that college in the United States can be very expensive. What isn't as understood is how much financial aid is granted every year. In the most recent year that we have data for, $177 billion in financial aid was granted. And that's about where things are. I've seen it higher, actually. But yeah, 175 to 185 billion every year. Okay. That's what financial aid is. That's where it comes from. And here is how it is granted. There are two metrics by which financial aid can be granted. The first one is merit-based. And so, this is one that might be probably more open to you than the other. But this is granted not on your finances, your financial need, but granted in recognition of student achievement. So think scholarships. This is the difference between grants and scholarships. So academic scholarships, athletic scholarships, artistic scholarships, something that the student has done. And this is largely from the colleges, right? So everything that the federal government does, for example, none of that is merit-based. Very little of what states do, our state does, for example, is merit-based. Most of that is need-based. So the lion's share of merit-based aid comes from the colleges. And so colleges have really different practices on this. Some colleges give out a lot of merit-based aid, merit scholarships. Some colleges don't. Some colleges don't give out any merit-based aid. It all depends on either their capabilities or their policies, because some colleges with a lot of money to give don't give out merit-based aid. So it really all depends. So it's a question that you can ask financial aid offices. Also, check and see if you do get a scholarship, because you'll get a financial aid offer based on a year. It'll be good for the year, and you probably need to reapply every year. Depends on the college, but that may be the case that you need to do that. If you have a scholarship for the freshman year, understand if this can be renewed from year to year, and if it can be renewed, what do you need to do in order to renew it? So is there a GPA that you need to maintain? Are there some other requirements if it's an athletic scholarship, for example? Just make sure that you know what you need to do in order to renew so that you can do it. I mean, the very few times that I have talked to a family whose aid has been significantly lower from one year to the next, it's been because the student did not re-qualify for a scholarship. And then the other thing you want to understand about this is, just like every college has their own process or their own capabilities as far as scholarships are concerned. If they do offer scholarships, they're going to have their own deadlines for those scholarships. Colleges will have their own financial aid deadlines. So whatever forms that you may be filing for financial aid, you have to do that by their deadlines. But in addition to the main financial aid forms, which we'll talk about in just a second, if a college has their own merit-based scholarship, there may be a separate application for that. So make sure you look on the admissions website, the financial aid website, to see what applications are necessary, what applications are available, and what their deadlines are. And don't miss any deadlines. Because if you do miss a deadline at a college, you're not likely to see aid from that college or the aid that you're applying for. But anyways, that's merit-based aid. So it's awarded in recognition of student achievement. Varies a lot from school to school. So you want to follow up with the school and ask them questions about merit-based aid. Now, most financial aid is need-based financial aid. But for international students, it's rarer to qualify for need-based aid. That is going to be a determination that is made at the college level. So some colleges um, do not give need-based aid to international students. Some do. So again, you want to make sure that you check the website of the college or talk to the financial aid office of the college. If you do qualify for need-based aid or qualify to apply for need-based aid, this is going to be based, they're going to determine your financial eligibility for this aid or your financial need. And so how they do that is basically by the information that you put on your financial aid applications, which we're going to get into in just a moment. That's the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, which you need to file in order to be eligible for federal aid, aid from whatever state you may be eligible to receive from. And most colleges actually in the United States just use the information that is put on the FAFSA to determine how much need-based financial aid you're eligible to receive. There's another form that you may have to file in addition to this, and we'll talk about that called the CSS profile, or potentially another one called an ISFA for international students, and we'll mention that. But essentially, your eligibility is determined by a standardized formula, whichever application it is. It's all a standardized formula, it goes through. Examples of need-based financial aid include grants. So that's your gift aid that's based on need, loans, your federal student loans, and work study. And even though most financial aid is need-based, students still have to be making satisfactory academic progress in order to continue to qualify for it. So they want to make sure that you're actually moving through your application, your course of study and continuing to qualify. Okay, so the application process. Just so you know, we're going to zoom out before we actually talk about the applications, talk about the timeline. And I'm not sure where you are, if you're all sort of heading off to college next year or the year after. Um, but generally speaking, colleges have their admissions deadlines where you need to get all your admissions information to them and applications to them. They also have a financial aid process. And so I always tell students that you should be working on both of them at the same time. They're going to have their own deadlines for each, but they're probably around the same time. Sometimes people make the mistake of just doing the admissions, waiting to hear whether or not they've been admitted, and then applying for financial aid. And that's not what you want to do. The reason is because if you do that, you most likely have missed the financial aid deadline at the college. And if you miss a financial aid deadline at the college, you're not likely to get any financial aid from the college, and you want that. So you just want to make sure that you know what your deadlines are. So what forms are available to you and what forms can you file and what are the deadlines, and don't miss any deadlines. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can apply, a couple of different schedules that you can apply on. The first is regular decision. And so I think about this as regular decision if you're applying, let's say, for the year beginning in 2025, you want to have that in, again, check with the school. Every college is going to be different, but generally speaking, early in the year, February, March, that's going to be your early deadline. I'm sorry, that's going to be your regular decision deadline. But there's also early action or early decision. And so early action is going to have earlier deadlines for the admissions application and usually correspondingly earlier deadlines for the financial aid. And so the difference between early action and early decision is that early action is just you're applying early and you want to know early whether or not you've been admitted. So those deadlines might be in October or November, right? Early decision is you're applying early. You want to know early whether or not you've been admitted, but it's a binding decision. So when you're applying early decision to a college, you're telling them, if you admit me, early decision, I am committing to attending this college. So what we always tell people is that if you're applying early decision, be very careful. Make sure that you want to go to that college that you were applying early decision to. You shouldn't be applying to early decision to more than one school because that's not a commitment you can make to more than one school. And make sure that your financing is firm for that school. So make sure that you know that this is something that you can afford, even if you don't get the financial aid offer that you were hoping to receive. So that's early decision. Again, meet application deadlines. I can't stress that enough. And we have a college application manager on our website. The link is right there that you can download and print off. And it'll just show you, school FAFSA, yes, CSS profile, yes, and what the deadlines are. And you can check those off and fill it out accordingly. So that's generally speaking the timeline. Two separate processes, the admissions and the financial aid, but they should be running concurrently. The FAFSA I'm going to talk about because it's important in case it's relevant to anybody watching this. But if you have questions on it, if you're watching this later on, or if you're here and you want to talk, we can discuss it further because I'm probably going to go a little bit quicker than I normally do on it. It's the free application for federal student aid within the United States, and for citizens, it's kind of the main financial aid form. If you want financial aid from the federal government, the state government, or most often the colleges, you usually need to file a FAFSA. It's typically available October 1st every year for the following academic year. This year it was not, but hopefully it will be on October 1st. So current high school juniors will do the 25-26 FAFSA. Um, the FAFSA needs to be filed by contributors. They call it, these are people who need to put their information on the FAFSA. The student is obviously a contributor, and most often one or more parents need to be contributors as well. So the way it would work is the student needs to start it, send it off to the other contributors once they're done. Before that happens, they need to get what's called an FSA ID, Federal Student Aid ID. Student has to get one. It's a username and password that they create. Should be pretty easy to do so that they can start and actually complete and submit the FAFSA. And most often, one or more parents, again, needs an FSA ID. So if you filed joint taxes as parents, married parents, then only one parent needs an FSA ID. But if for whatever reason both parents filed separately or didn't file, then both parents would need an FSA ID. So that's the first part where it gets a bit confusing there. But you need to have an email address. You don't need to have a social security number, but you do need to be, well, we'll get to that. But if you're filing a FAFSA, it's enormously helpful to have an FSA ID because you need that in order to file online. So, as again, who needs one? The student's spouse, if it's an independent student, the student's married, both of them would need if they didn't file their taxes together. And then every parent listed on the FAFSA, but again, if the parents filed taxes jointly, then only one parent would need an FSA ID. Again, you don't need a social security number to do it. So what's on the FAFSA? This is the big sticking point for us today is student citizenship status, because all U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens can receive financial aid. So that's basically another way of saying if you want aid from the federal government, you need to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident or an eligible non-citizen. An eligible non-citizen, and there's guidance on this when you're filing the form. It's a fairly narrow category. So, you know, refugees, asylum seekers, holders of I-94 records, and things like that. If you're just living in another country, then you would not be considered an eligible non-citizen. And within the state of Massachusetts, yeah, there's information about undocumented students. They can apply for Massachusetts and state aid, but that doesn't really apply to us here today. You need to put the colleges in which the student is applying. Parent information needs to go on the FAFSA for most students, unless they're independent students. If they're not, they need to include their parents' information. All married parents, including same-sex parents, both of those parents need to list their income and their assets. All biological parents who live together, whether they're married or not, all part of the same household, mom and dad just never got married, they would need to be listed on both of their information, income and assets would need to be listed on the FAFSA. In the cases of divorced or separated parents, whichever parent who provided more financial support in the past 12 months would be the parent that files the FAFSA and would be the one to list their income and their assets. And if that parent has remarried, then their current spouse would need to do that as well. If the parents if parents provided equal support, use the parent with the greater income and assets. I should say that if you're not sure how to figure that out, the federal philosophy, they really want you to determine which parent provided more support. The guidance that we always receive is it could be you decided that you bought an extra cup of coffee over the year, and that put it over to 50.01%. So you're the parent that needs to do it. They really want you to make that determination as a family. You also list the number of people in the household and the number of children in college for the following year. Not that that will make it into the calculation, that last bit. Okay, so I'm talking about information that needs to go on to the FAFSA and who needs to list their information. So what information gets listed? Well, it's parent and student income and assets. Those are the four main categories: parent income, parent assets, student income, student assets. So since students tend to not have a lot of income and assets, it typically falls on the parents, and eligibility decisions are typically made on the parent information. Now, when you're putting in your income when you're filing your FAFSA and you need to list your income, if you've filed US taxes, you can and actually have to give consent for the FAFSA to go into the IRS, import that data, and just pre-populate that. If you are paying foreign taxes and not US taxes, then you can't use this data exchange. They're not going to be able to import that. You need to manually import. You need to manually list that tax information or income information. If you filed US taxes, but you're claiming a foreign income deduction, you can use the data exchange. They can import that data and put it directly into the FAFSA, but you would need to manually account for your foreign income exclusion. Okay. There's also spaces to list some untaxed income as well, and they'll be explicit as to what pieces of untaxed income you need to add. Now it comes to assets. And so for assets, what they're looking at for parents and students are the value of your checking and savings account the day you file your FAFSA, the value of any businesses that are owned by any students or parents, as well as farms. Other property, so not the property that you own, not your primary residence. So if you own your primary residence, the residence that you live in, that is not expected to be included as an asset on the FAFSA. Your retirement account is not expected to be added as an asset on the FAFSA. But any second property or any other investments are expected to be listed. If you have 529 accounts, which are savings accounts, which none of you do, then you can list them for the student, but only that student that's you're filing the form for. But debt is important to know. What they're looking at is what's coming in and what you have, not the debt that you owe. So debt is not reported anywhere on the FAFSA except on assets. And what that means is if you have, for example, second property, let's say it's worth $500,000, but you owe $100,000 on it, then the value of that property is $400,000. That's the only way in which debt is reported. So what I will say about that is this is an example of if you have things like medical debt, if you're helping to take care of other relatives, or if you're having to pay something that is not showing up on the FAFSA, but it is going to impact negatively your ability to pay for college, reach out to the financial aid office and let them know. Financial aid offices can make adjustments to the financial aid formula based on the information that you give them. So you want to make sure that you do give it to them. It's up to the college to determine whether or not they will do it. But they do it, and they need you to reach out to them, and they need to have the documentation from you so that they can show why they did what they did. The other financial aid applications, the one that you're more likely to have filed or need to file in the future. Someone wants to know if a mortgage shows up. It would show up on a second property for the FAFSA. So again, remember, they're not looking at your primary residence at all. So it wouldn't show up there, but it would show up as debt on another property. And again, if it doesn't show up on that first property and you want to make sure that the school knows about it, reach out to the financial aid office and let them know and see if they can make an exception and increase your eligibility for aid based on that. Thank you for the question. Okay. I know I'm talking a lot, so it's good to have a question. Lets me know that you're listening. Um, so the CSS profile. This is, you know, what I say to people in the United States is that you need to file your FAFSA. You need to send that everywhere because every college needs your FAFSA. Okay. But in addition to that, and this is obviously that's not the case for many of you, but in addition to that form, um, some colleges want more information. And the most common form that other colleges would want, in addition to the FAFSA, is this form, the CSS profile. And the reason that colleges would want another form is that these are for colleges that grant a lot of their own money. They give out a lot of their own money for aid, and they want more information than the federal formula gives them. So they want to make sure that they're apportioning out their financial aid in the best way possible. So the CSS profile asks more questions than the FAFSA. It's a more exhaustive process. It doesn't mean that you're going to get less aid. It really doesn't, but they just want to know more. So they'll ask for things that the FAFSA doesn't ask for. The biggest difference between the FAFSA and the profile right off the bat is that the CSS profile is not a free form. It costs $25 to file your CSS profile to your first school, and then $16 for each additional colleges. There are fee waivers that are associated with it, and the system will calculate whether or not you're eligible to receive it as you're filling it out. My understanding is that it doesn't often apply to international students, but it could. Or maybe that's codes that because sometimes colleges give out fee waiver codes for students and they can put those in. But the profile does become available every October 1st. They're going to expect you to list income from the past 2 years and estimate some income for the upcoming year. Um, some other big differences between the profile and the FAFSA. The profile probably will ask you to list some assets that FAFSA doesn't, like the value of retirement accounts and the value of your primary residence. Now, it's up to each school because schools can sort of determine which questions to a certain point will be on their profile. So if you're applying to a certain school, you may have to answer a certain question, where if you're not applying to that school, you may not have to answer that question for other schools. And then in addition to the CSS profile, there might be some other college-specific financial aid applications. I know, for example, for international students, there's another form that is used by some colleges called the ISFA, and it's the International Student Financial Aid Application. So this is for students outside of the US. if you are some issues that are known to have come up from time to time. Um, if you are an international student and you're living outside of the US, but you are a US citizen as a student and you're able to file a FAFSA, but you don't have income in the US, they still want your income and asset information. What you need to do is convert whatever currency you are getting paid in into US dollars and then fill out the form accordingly. Again, you probably won't be able to use the IRS data exchange if the parents file foreign returns. But again, the United States bases their tax filing requirements on citizenship and not residence. So oftentimes, if you are a United States citizen and you're living abroad, you also need to file U.S. taxes. So if you're able to do that, you can use your U.S. taxes, but again, you would need to manually account for your foreign income exclusion. For the CSS profile, um, so CSS profile is managed by the College Board, and they're the organization that runs the SAT and the AP courses and exams. And they have a lot of great resources on their site as well, and tutorials specifically for international students. So I find them very useful. So just so that you're aware, that's a resource that you should go to and consult. But for the CSS profile, just a few things that we do know that come up. Unlike the FAFSA, you report income and assets in your local currency, and the form will convert that for you. So you don't want to make that change to US dollars and then fill out the form because that's going to mess up your eligibility. Keep it in your local currency, and the form will do that for you. Also, you need to create a College Board account. So I know many of your international students probably haven't taken the SATs. So you wouldn't have a previously existing College Board account. So you need to create that for the student before you start to file. And when it says citizenship status, it should be other for international students. And I mention that because there is a category for eligible non-citizens, but that does not apply to international students. Those are some of the narrower categories that we were discussing earlier. And also, since your system and levels of schooling might be different, you want to use 12th grade for grade level if you're planning on attending college next year. You can manually input your high school. There's a or the school that you're at now, because there's a national sort of search. You can put in a number and they'll search for your high school. But if it's a foreign high school or foreign school, you can list other and then just manually put that in as well. Now, I mentioned the CSS profile is not a free form, and that costs $25 for your first school and then $16 to each additional school. Because of this, some colleges that will award aid, whether it's merit-based aid or need-based aid, to international students, also accept this form, the ISFA, which again is the International Student Financial Aid Application. It's for students to file in place of the CSS profile if the CSS profile is going to be too sort of financially onerous for students to fill out. And I'm not quite sure how they make that determination. I think this is determined at a school level to begin with. So this is probably a conversation. Any questions about the ISPA should be directed to the International Admissions or Financial Aid Office at the college. But I know it's used by a few dozen colleges in the United States. So a couple in Massachusetts, like Tufts University, and I believe Amherst University. So those are the ones, of course, being from Massachusetts that I'm more aware of. So just some issues that do come up for students outside of the U.S. who are filing financial aid forms that we know and can anticipate. Now, after you file your financial aid forms, the colleges, the state, federal government, whoever it might be, is going to get that information electronically. They're going to send in the case of the FAFSA, a submission summary by email. In the case of the profile, it's a confirmation, and that's an email to you letting you know that everything has been received and everything is fine. Colleges may request additional documentation from you. And so, especially if you're not sending in tax information through the IRS, these things might occur. My only real advice is to keep in contact with the financial aid office. If there's mail, read the mail. If there's email, read the email. If you're on a portal, make sure you keep on top of the portal communications. If you get anything that is a verification form from the college that says, we need this piece of information from you, you just want to make sure that you get that to them as quickly as you can, because they won't be able to finalize your financial aid offer until those questions have been resolved. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem with any application. It could be you're randomly selected to be verified. Colleges do that. Some colleges verify everybody. So it really just depends. But just keep in contact with the college, keep on top of the correspondence, and get them any information that they're asking for as quickly as they can. Because again, they need that before they can finalize your offer. And again, that just sort of drives home the need to think of the financial aid office as a resource for you. And hopefully, there may be international offices that the colleges that you're applying to. Find a friend in that office or in the financial aid office that you can talk to. They are a resource for you, and it should be looked on as a resource. So I know sometimes, at least in the US, when you're giving when somebody's asking for all of your financial information so that they can determine how much financial aid they're going to give you, people can get a little cagey from time to time and not want to give them as much information as maybe they should have. But you do want to do that, because the more information that they have, the more that they can help you. So any way that you can get in contact with them, please do. Once they have all this information and they're looking at all of this, how do they make these financial aid decisions? And to think about that, you need to think about two figures. The first one is cost of attendance. Cost of attendance is everything that's going to everything that it's going to cost to go to that college for a year. That includes billed and non-billed expenses. So billed expenses, direct expenses, are things that show up on a bill. So tuition and fees, perfect example. You know what that's going to be. It's on the bill. Food and housing, if you're living on campus and you have a meal plan, that's got a definite cost associated with it. But other things that you're going to have to pay for don't. So things like books and supplies, transportation, and personal expenses throughout the year. Every college is going to have their cost of attendance on their website. It's going to be a different cost of attendance at different colleges, and it's going to probably be a different cost of attendance for different students within. For example, not every student is going to pay food and housing, because not every student is going to be living on campus. But those figures will be on the website, and it's going to be different, as I said, at every college. The other figure that you want to keep in mind is the student aid index. This is the amount of money that you will be expected to contribute or absorb as a family. So whether you're filing a FAFSA or a profile or both, they're going to put your income and assets and the student's income and assets through a formula and come out with this number called the student aid index. And so they don't necessarily think that you should be able to write out a check for this amount. It's almost always higher than what people think that they can afford for a year, because that's how they're looking at it. Like, I just can't write out a check for this amount. But that's just the calculated amount that the formula feels that you should be able to absorb for a year of college. And so the financial aid formula is the cost of attendance at a particular college minus the student aid index is your financial aid eligibility. And what I mean by that is this. let's say you're attending a college that costs $45,000 a year. And according to your student aid index, the formula feels that you should be able to spend uh, $5,000 for college this year as a family. Okay. Well, the first thing that's going to go towards that 45,000 is your contribution, that $5,000. Now we've got $40,000 in financial aid to fill, right? Because 45,000 cost of attendance minus the SAI of 5,000 is 40,000. So we got our grants and our scholarships here for 27,500, not bad. Our student loans for 5,500, work study for 2,000, but we didn't get all of the 40,000 that we were eligible to receive. So again, going back, cost of attendance minus student aid index is not your financial aid, it's your financial aid eligibility. So you're eligible to receive 40,000, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get 40,000. And in this case, we got 35,000. So almost 40,000, almost up to our full eligibility, but not quite. So what our responsibility is the student aid index of 5,000. That's the formula told us we need to pay, plus the 5,000 that we didn't get from financial aid. And it's more common than not to have a gap. So it's more common than not to not get all of the financial aid that you're eligible to receive. If you want to know how much aid you might get from a college, every college is required to have what's called a net price calculator on their website. You can go and spend 5 minutes and put in some income information and whatnot, and it'll give you your estimated aid and your resulting balance. And depending on the college, they may ask for merit information like GPA or things like that, so they can make sure that if you're eligible for a scholarship, they're going to put that in there. Some colleges won't have that. So net price calculators aren't all the same. Some colleges are a little bit more detailed maybe than others, more bare bones. But I think in general, they're a pretty good tool to use if you want some idea of what colleges may cost after aid for you. And I know as international students, it could be trickier. Um, so I would actually, if you want to do this, I would say convert your currency to dollars before doing it, because I think LDs, the net price calculators probably run on dollars. Once you get an offer, they're all going to be different, right? So even colleges that cost the same, even colleges where you may be eligible for the same amount of aid, you're going to give different uh, offers from those colleges. You just want to make sure that you're looking at all the items. So college A, B, and C here, again, we have the same eligibility at every college. And it looks as if you scroll down to the bottom here and just look at that unmet need of $5,000, they all look the same. But look at the line items, right? So grants and scholarships, you've got college A has given us $27,500 in grants and scholarships, 10,000 less from that from college B, and then nothing at all from college C. Same amount of student loans. Where's the difference made up? It's in this parent loan here. So sometimes colleges will package in a parent loan with their aid, typically a federal loan called a plus. If you're an international student, that's not going to be a worry. They won't do that because you're not eligible as an international student. But if you're not, just make sure that, you know, if you see that plus, it's not financial aid. It doesn't mean it's a bad loan. It's a fine loan to have, but it's a loan that the parent needs to apply for and be credit approved. So you didn't get it. It wasn't granted. It's there sort of as a suggestion of how you can pay the balance. But just know that you weren't granted it, and it's not strictly speaking financial aid. So those things that make the federal direct student loan financial aid, it's not the case with the plus. But again, not a bad loan to have, but just be aware of that. Now, when it comes to paying for college and you have a balance due, after financial aid, there's really only three ways that you can pay. Past income, meaning any savings that you might have. present income, meaning the wages that you're earning while your student is in school, and then future income, which is loans. And it's a big story here. It's probably a big story, or it's probably well known in outside of the United States as well, that a lot of people borrow for loans. So that in and of itself, borrowing for college is not necessarily a problem. The problem is, of course, when you borrow more than you need to borrow or borrow more than you can afford to pay back. So I know if you're borrowing this entire balance due of $20,000 here, that might be roughly speaking a loan payment of about $200 to $250 a month. Okay. Which may sound okay, it may not, but it may. But just remember, this is only year one. So you've got 4 years to go. It's worth it to pay what you can out of pocket from other means before you start to borrow. So again, in this example, we have a student savings of $1,000. Maybe that's from a summer job. Parent saving of $4,000. That knocks our balance due down to $15,000, which is where our um, payment plan comes in. Colleges usually work through outside providers to offer these payment plans. Let's say you can afford to pay $500 a month. On a 10-month payment plan, that's $5,000. So $5,000 off the bill means you only have a $10,000 bill left. Borrowing a $10,000 loan, it's still a good amount of money, but about 100 to 150, $125, whatever it might be on a monthly loan is a monthly payment for a loan is a lot different than 200 to 250, especially times four. So you're going to about $400 a month to $500 a month versus $900 a month to $1,000. And so remember that most often students got their loans through the federal direct program, which is part of your aid, meaning parents are going to have to apply and be approved for any other loans. And so if you're a co-applicant on these loans with the students, you're equally responsible. For international students, I know it's trickier. International loans or loans, educational loans for international students are harder to come by. Some lenders will lend out to international applicants. Some will do it if international students have a U.S. cosigner. Some won't. So it all depends. You can look if you are considering borrowing. This again is something that you can check with your financial aid office with. They would have a lender list, or they may have a lender list that they have worked with, or they at least know other international students have come through their school, and what have they done, and what options have they used to pay. So I'm not recommending you do anything, of course, but that is something that you can ask the college about if you're looking for lenders that will that will lend to international students. So you want to consider each school's net price. So what is the net price after aid? What are you looking at? Also, consider the number of children you'll send to college and think in terms of total debt. That is 4+ years of school and potential starting salary. So these are all things that you should consider when you're trying to determine how much debt you are willing to take on a yearly basis and in total. And also, of course, as the student considering graduate school. So that is uh, and a whole set of other questions as well. And aid is different at the graduate school level. Some free resources, FAFSA not really applying to most of you as your international students. Um, but I would just say to reach out to MEFA with any questions. You can reach out to Kristen, who can get in touch with me. Reach out to your financial aid offices is really, I think, going to be the final destination for you and for your questions, because since most, if not all, of your financial aid is going to come from the colleges and universities themselves, the final decisions on how much you're eligible for and how much you receive will be made at the college level, at the college financial aid office. If you would like to reach out, or if you want to consult us, you can go to MEFA.org. You can look at our upcoming events. You can look at our blogs. You can look at our tools and calculators and anything that might be applicable to you. And also, this is our social media information. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X. Our YouTube channel, our podcast, and our LinkedIn. So any way that we can be there for you, if you have any questions, we definitely want to be a resource for you. Um, I want to thank you for your attention to this. I know some of it might not have been um, relevant, some of it might be, but again, if there's a chance that we can help, we definitely want to be there for you. And if you have any questions, I can only say it again, reach out, and good luck to everybody with all of their future plans and all their pathways. I wish you success. So let me know if you have any questions.
Thank
It's a
you.
lot of talking I did in an hour, so.
I actually have a bit of a clarification. I always
Oh yeah.
thought that the FAFSA was only for US citizens and permanent residents.
It is, yeah. Did I
Okay.
say? And there are some eligible non-citizens. So if you're like a asylum grantee or a Cuban Haitian entrant or holder of an I-94, that those are eligible non-citizens. But the profile and since most of the financial aid is going to come from the colleges, um, that's going to be a profile or a specific financial or the other form called the ISFA, which is a college decision whether or not they're going to use that form. And a few dozen colleges do.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's it. I think so. Have a good evening, everybody. I know it's evening time, so enjoy and please let me know if you have any further questions.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan.